this recording be available after?
Hello, everyone. Just bear with us a few minutes. Okay, we're going to start off with a video. I hope everybody can see me. People who know me personally and you're like, Michelle, can't see you. Something's going on, like text me. But I am checking in the comments, making sure that everybody is online. We're going to start off with a video. Again, apologies if we have any technical issues. I do want to start off by saying that this is a press conference. It's meant for the media, which is why we did it at 10 a.m. in the hopes that they put it in their noon cast, 4 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, and their nighttime news. That's why we did it so early. We are mindful that our educators and our parents and other people who are working are have to do things in the evening, right? Because you guys are busy. And so we will continue to have events and we'll have them in the evening so that people can participate. But this is a press conference. In the age that we are now, we're able to do things virtually. So we said, hey, let's invite people so they can watch it. So that's what we did. But we are mindful of making sure that when we reach out to the community, we do so with what is most convenient to everybody. So we're going to start with a quick video and then we're going to go ahead and start with our speakers. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A. We're doing our best. This is also streaming live on Facebook to monitor those questions on Facebook as well. It's a little bit challenging, but we're going to try there. Those of you that did register for the Zoom, you can type your questions in the Q&A as well when we are done. And we'll be sharing a video to start off with.
For too long, Nevada's K-12 education has been on the bottom of the good list and the top of the bad. Nevadans say they value education, but our priorities show otherwise. Did you know that in the last 3 decades, we've sunk from 24th in per pupil funding to the 40s? Nevada also received an F in funding levels, distribution, and effort. In fact, we were the only state to get an F in all 3 categories. Nevada also spends less of its budget on K-12 schools than the national average. And after the 2008 recession, even as the economy...
I apologize. You heard that. You want to see it too, huh? Excuse us. Okay, so this is the one.
For too long, Nevada's K-12 education has been on the bottom of the good list and the top of the bad. Nevadans say they value education, but our priorities show otherwise. Did you know that in the last 3 decades, we've sunk from 24th in per pupil funding to the 40s? Nevada also received an F in funding levels, distribution, and effort. In fact, we were the only state to get an F in all 3 categories. Nevada also spends less of its budget on K-12 schools than the national average. And after the 2008 recession, even as the economy grew, Nevada was one of the worst states in recovering school funding, resulting in a loss of $4.2 billion in revenue. The result? Nevada students learn in some of the largest class sizes in the nation, and educators have some of the lowest salaries per pupil. Our students face an uphill battle. Nevada has some of the lowest ACT scores, and less than half of students are deemed proficient per state standards. Nevada also ranks 49th in Kids' Chance for Success. Nevada is in another recession. Are we going to do what we always do? Cut ourselves into austerity? Or will we plan for prosperity? Sign the pledge to empower Nevada's future and tell your legislators that it's time for Nevada to stop shortchanging our students. If we want a stable, diversified economy, we need to invest in a quality public education.
All right, thank you, everybody. And we're going to kick it off with President of EDON, Mike Kazmierski. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Mike Kazmarski, CEO of EDON, the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. We cover mostly the Reno-Sparks area. Thank you all for joining us today. EDON is part of this coalition because from our economic development perspective, nothing is more important than the quality of our workforce. And it takes an adequately funded quality education system to get us there. The jobs of the future are coming to our state right now, advanced manufacturing, technology, and many others. And they require skills like coding, STEM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. All our other representatives K through 12 system due primarily to inadequate funding. We are rated F across the board for funding our education system. In fact, our sixth graders in the Washoe County School District are using a science book that's 21 years old. Primarily because of funding again. Our kids deserve better. Our businesses of the future require better. We understand these are tough economic times, but just returning the cuts imposed by last year does little to address our long-term education needs. To accept anything less than the national average in per pupil funding, which by the way which is exactly where we were in the 1980s, is to accept less for our kids and accept less for our economic future. Please join us in setting a vision for our state with a quality education system adequately funded. We selected smart and passionate people to represent us, many of them with their own kids in our education system. We want to make sure and make it clear to them that adequately funding our education system must be the #1 priority for our state. Thank you for your support, and I'll be followed by Kaylin Evans, teacher in the Washoe County School District.
Hi, my name is Kaylin Evans. As Mike just spoke, I am an educator here in Washoe County School District. I am also the president of Empower Nevada Teachers. Empower Nevada Teachers is a grassroots organization consisting of current active educators throughout the state. We also look at partnering with other nonprofit organizations, business owners, parents, and general community stakeholders to build a coalition for education here in Nevada. That is why we are a part of Empower Nevada's Future, because we understand that in order to tackle something like educational funding in Nevada, it's going to take the entire community getting behind this. We are here as educators, helping advocate not only for our students and our profession, but our entire community, because we understand the impact that education has on all of our lives. Every facet of society is impacted by the quality of our education. And we need to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to adequately support and fund our education system. As you saw in those videos, it is very clear that the state of Nevada does not adequately provide the funding and resources that students and educators need to be successful. And because of this, we've continually seen these impacts on student achievement. Part of what we've been trying to do, a big part, is community awareness. We need the educators, we need community members to understand the realities that are facing our public education system. So we've been working via social media and now print media through billboards to help educate the community on exactly what is going on. So if Michelle wanted to put a graphic up of our billboard that we have. So we put together a billboard and this billboard is coming 580 south from Reno to Carson. The idea behind that is we wanted lawmakers that every time they have to commute into Carson City, that they will have to drive by this billboard and understand and see exactly what we're doing in terms of our educational funding. Michelle, is that, there we go. So we chose this particular graphic because we really need, we see education as important as feeding our children. And if you look at our funding versus the national average, we spend approximately 30% less in terms of funding every child. And when you look at the impacts that we know education has on the long-term success and viability of a child, and being able to become a productive member of a society, so many of the students in our community, school is their lifeline. And if we are not providing them with the adequate resources and funding and support, we are starving them of a future in the same way that we would be starving them of education opportunities right now. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass this to high school principal John Anzalone.
Thanks, Caleb. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. This is John Anzalone. I'm the proud principal at Sierra Vista High School here in Las Vegas. And, you know, as a student in Las Vegas, I was very lucky to have a wonderful education here in Clark County. And I'll tell you that I look back on some of the miracles that our teachers did in the classroom. And now as a principal, as a former teacher, and even as a father, I am so proud of what is accomplished every day in our classrooms. And that is with the lowest funding, or one of the lowest fundings in the country. So the miracles that our teachers and our educators are pulling off, and the work and the creativity and the innovation that our kids are pulling off every day is astounding. And I often ask myself, imagine what we could do if we were actually properly funded. As a principal, especially at a large comprehensive high school, we have a very large budget to distribute. But I will tell you that every single year, it seems to be such a crapshoot. Very inconsistent budget numbers, sometimes some surprises. That's never fun. Discrepancies at times, and sometimes even more questions than answers. And that's not to mention, every year it seems like we face budget cuts. What this funding formula will do, if it's written and executed properly, will finally give us that transparency to take away some of those surprises that we've often seen. It will provide an algorithm that we can predict well before the school year starts. And I will tell you, as a principal, that is so relieving to know that we should know what we're facing, what we'll have well before the school year starts. And that will inform our planning, that will help us reduce class sizes, and that will help us provide the resources, the materials that our teachers and our kids and our families desperately need. And I truly believe in my heart, especially coming from someone who is so vested in this city and in this county and in the education system, it will truly change everyone's outlook on education if we have finally the transparent budget formula that we've been waiting for so long, nearly 60 years. On that note, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I'm proud to be a principal in Clark County. I'm proud of my school, and I'm so proud of the work that Michelle is doing and so many others that are working to improve the budget portion of this wonderful city and state. So with that said, I'll pitch it to Amanda, and thank you for having me today.
All right. Oh, can y'all see me? Can you hear me? Let's see. I think I'm still. Let's see. Oh. Hello. Wow, I'm really close. Hi, my name is Amanda Morgan. I'm the Executive Director of Educate Nevada now. And we're going to talk a little bit about why our organization, which is really focused on equity and adequacy for Nevada public schools, why we really care about this campaign, why we wanted to be a part of this campaign. And we also developed a report to really show the sense of urgency with launching this right now. We cannot wait 2 more years or 4 more years to start making a plan and moving towards a goal of adequate and equitable funding. So let's pull up this report here. Okay. All right, so hopefully y'all can see that. So we created a report for the Empower Nevada's Future campaign, and it really examines, why right now is such a critical time for us to start having this discussion. It's always been dire in the state, But with the transition to a new funding formula, now more than ever, it's really, really critical that we start having a plan and developing new revenue sources and moving towards adequate funding, moving towards the national average in funding. Next slide, there we go. So as many folks probably know, we're transitioning to a new, what's called the people-centered funding formula. And what this does is it transitions current programs, categorical programs known as Zoom or Victory or New Nevada Plan, you might also S178. It's transitioning a lot of those programs into weights. So these are multipliers for each student that is eligible. This is really critical. This is something that we've advocated for because it's really important that every single student that has needs gets those needs addressed by the state. Right now with those programs, only 20% of at-risk and English learner students receive any additional state funding to meet their unique needs. 68% of EL students are not receiving additional state aid, 84% of at-risk students are not. And there's actually 3 districts in the state where 75% of their English learner students are not receiving any additional funding to meet their needs. So what are weights? It's additional funding for each student to meet their needs. It's usually expressed as a multiplier of the base funding. So this is kind of the base per pupil funding that every student gets. Under the PCFP, these funds would be allocated directly to schools based on their number of eligible students. So right now we have these kind of programmatic school level programs to kind of target really high density areas with EL and at-risk students. That's going to change. These funds will be spread out to every single student that qualifies for one of these weights. And it will be paid for by the funds transition from Zoom and Victory and New Nevada Plan funding. So effectively, these programs are going away. Next slide.
Okay, I need to fix something real quick. I'm gonna stop because there's feedback from my computer.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay, sorry if y'all were hearing echoes there. So we've always advocated for weights because it's really truly the most equitable way to provide funding to students with unique needs. Here's the problem, and here's why there's a sense of urgency. Currently under Zoom and Victory programs, an English learner would get about $2,100 per pupil to meet their needs. At risk, about $1,100 per pupil. Well, when you're spreading those funds that only meet the needs of 20% of students, and you're spreading that to 100% of students that have needs, well, obviously that weight is going to take a nosedive. And what we're seeing is English learners would get $1,485 per pupil for the first year of the proposed budget, and at risk would get $250 per pupil. So imagine going from $1,100 per pupil to meet those needs to $250 per pupil. And it gets even worse in the second year. These proposed budget numbers for 22-23 were recently updated by Department of Ed, but even under the new numbers, it's still less than it is the first year of the budget. Under adequacy or under kind of a fully funded formula, English learners would receive about $4,600 per pupil, at risk about $2,700. So this is why it's so critical to start moving towards adequate funding. I'll go a little quicker because I know I only got a few minutes. So our report really examines what the impact will be on schools that are currently receiving Zoom and Victory and New Nevada Plan funding. So the report will be made available on the Empower Nevada's Future website. Please take a look at it. Here's some examples. I'll just talk about one, 50% funding loss for a Victory elementary school in the state. And these are actual numbers. We didn't want to put the name of the school and single the school out and cause panic, but this is what's going to effectively happen to these schools. Next slide. And we actually reached out to some of the principals of the schools we analyzed, and they were straight up. We're going to lose teachers, reading specialists, support professionals, after school programs, wraparound services, transportation supports. I mean, it's really going to have an impact, a noticeable impact on those schools. So I think the video already mentioned some of these different points, but I'll just go over them really quickly. You know, we weren't always last in the nation. I mean, right now, this petition is looking towards, you know, meeting the national average. Well, we used to be the national average just 50 years ago. And we've really taken a nosedive throughout the years to where now we're kind of ranked at the bottom between the worst and the bottom 5 consistently now. So it's possible for Nevada to be there. We've just kind of slowly deteriorated over time. You can see in how funding to schools has grown over the years. Back in the 70s to 80s, you know, about 8% growth annually, compounded growth. Look how that has changed in recent years. The last decade, 1.4% growth. That doesn't even cover inflation. So most districts, their inflation levels are about 3 and 5%. They're losing money year to year in this past decade. And, you know, one of the things we wanted to address real quick, a lot of times when we talk about, you know, dedicating funding to schools and increasing revenue, we always hear like, oh, well, we already did that. Didn't we have marijuana? Didn't we have the room tax? You know, what about the commerce tax? We keep throwing money at education and nothing seems to work. This is why. As these new revenue sources come available to the state actually contributes less of the general fund to education. So it's basically kind of like filling a bucket that has holes at the bottom of it. You're never going to end up increasing funds to school. So that is why you see, you know, new revenue sources going to education, but not actually seeing an impact on the school level. And I wanted to kind of end on a hopeful note. There are other states that have done this right. Wyoming's a great example. About 25 years ago, there was a lawsuit and there was a court order for them to start doing better in K-12 education. And they've done it. I mean, they don't have a state income tax. In a lot of ways, they're very similar to Nevada. They really started working hard to comply with that order and to do better by their students. And right here, you can see the results. Money does matter. It makes a difference for our schools. All right, so I'm going to pass it along to Rebecca Garcia, President of Nevada PTA.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And Nevada PTA has been in our state advocating to help ensure that all children can reach their full potential for over 80 years. And it is absolutely essential that students have a high quality education if they want to have a better future. And it depends on the community and our lawmakers to step up and ensure that adequate resources are provided to schools in order to give that education to all of our children. I'm a mom of 4 kids, ages 26 to 9, and I've been a resident in East Las Vegas for 16 years now. And I've personally seen the impact of how the lack of resources has affected my kids. From massive class sizes, it's just the standard that there'll be 34, 35, 40 kids in 4th and 5th grade classes. Lack of resources, whether it's textbooks or Chromebooks or other technology that they need. And the inability to provide all of the resources in different areas of our state. We see that kids attending schools in one county don't necessarily have the same access to resources that kids in another county do. And as a state, we need to ensure that all kids have what they need, regardless of what zip code they live in. Like Amanda just shared, resources for our kids who need extra support for English language learners, those shouldn't be dependent on which school they're zoned to attend. That should be available to all kids regardless. In order for Nevada to provide the education that is necessary for our kids, it requires money. It requires resources. And we need, as a state, to look to the future and recognize that if we want a better future, a more diversified economy, the time is now to start making those plans for our students. I've already graduated one student from the Clark County School District who saw the budget cuts of the last recession. My 9-year-old, my 11-year-old, my 13-year-old deserve to have an education, and they deserve to have that investment made in their future. And this is a matter that doesn't just matter to those of us who have kids in the system right now. It impacts our entire community. And I want to hand this off to Paul Hansen next to talk more about how this is an issue that is about all of us in Nevada. And if we can provide our kids a better education, it will help us all.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Paul Hansen, a retired Lutheran minister who pastored a congregation here in Las Vegas for 22 years. Excuse me, I forgot to take my mask off. Hope you heard that all right. I'm now a volunteer leader with Nevadans for the Common Good, a community organizing effort with 42 dues-paying member institutions in Southern Nevada, and a sister organizing effort just getting started in Northern Nevada. NCG's membership is made up of congregations, community organizations, parent groups, labor organizations, and neighborhoods from across the diversity of our valley. Several years ago, we listened to over 2,000 members of our institutions, and we learned that K through 12 public education is one of the biggest concerns these people voiced. As we explored further, we discovered that the issues from overcrowded classrooms to poor teacher morale and retention to inequities in the Clark County School District, all of these issues shared a common theme: lack of funding from the state. Public education is vital, not only to prepare workers for the economy, but to prepare citizens for our state, nation, and even the world. Things are very different from when I was a youngster. Today, in our complicated, pluralistic society, children need to learn to understand and tolerate differences, and how to meet and engage each other with dignity and compassion. With the rapid pace of change, they need to learn to be creative problem solvers, to pick up new skills, and to collaborate with others. At one of our gatherings, the question was posed, why should retired people whose children are now out of school be willing to pay taxes to support public schools? One elderly gentleman explained, when the ambulance comes for me, I want those EMTs to know what they're doing. Indeed, we are all in this together. For our own sake, for our children's sake, for our grandchildren's sake. We want a more stable and diverse economy, and we want citizens who function well in a pluralistic democracy. We are all responsible for Nevada's children. In my faith tradition, we follow one who, when some of the adults around him rebuked parents for bringing their children to him, grew indignant and said, "Let the little children come to me." We don't want our children to merely survive. We want them to thrive. So we need our representatives to plan now for the future. Sign the pledge and empower Nevada's future. Thank you.
Thank you all, and as promised, not without technical glitches. I did say that up front. Thank you all for being patient with us. We recommend everybody go to empowernevadasfuture.com and you sign the pledge and share with your friends. There's a button that so that you can reach out to us and get involved. If you want to see the presentation that Amanda Morgan just discussed, you can go to empowernevadasfuture.com on the Get Involved tab. You hit materials, and on the bottom, you're going to see graphics that you can share. You're going to see the video, you're going to see the presentation, and that's where we're going to be putting all kinds of materials so that you guys can share it on social media for us. Thank you to everybody who showed up. You know, it's time. Are we going to thrive? Or are we going to survive? That's kind of what we're asking ourselves during this time. Right now, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A, and I'll be reading them, and we'll be answering as best as possible. I'm also trying to monitor the Facebook and seeing if we have any questions there.
Someone had asked where they can find the recording of this. So I just.
Okay, so somebody asked where they can find the recording. We are gonna take this and upload it on the website, empowernevadasfuture.com. We did have a question from somebody that asked about the schools, if there was a hold harmless for the schools or just the districts. At the moment, it's only for the districts. And even that's a little concerning right now. Amanda, do you want to explain that a little bit?
About that. Yeah, so under the People-Centered Funding Plan, there's a required, or the legislative intent, I should say, to hold districts harmless during the transition, which means they would receive the same allocation that they did in the 2019-20 school year going forward. So there wouldn't be, an unexpected loss of funding that would impact the district. Unfortunately, under the proposed budget, the governor is proposing that only state funds, so the state share of funding to schools, actually be the same level as it was in 2019-20. Well, obviously, there's some big problems with that because not only has state revenue declined, but so has local revenue. So districts will see a drop in funding. There's just no way around it. It will not be, as PCFP intended, them receiving the same allocation they did in 2019-20. There will certainly be a drop because we know local funding is going to come in below that. So hopefully I answered that.
And the next question that we got was, it's a crisis. Is this really the time to be advocating for additional funds? And Mike Kazmierski from EDON is going to be answering that question from us.
Well, it's never a great time to raise revenue. When times are good, people say we don't need to do it now. When times are bad, you may not feel that way. However, if you don't invest in education now, we will continue to have recessions and depressions like this because the quality jobs that survive recessions like this, where the funding does drop, will not come here, will not grow here. And the kinds of the economy we want, Northern Nevada has a better economy than the South because we've done some of this already. This needs to be across the state, and it takes a quality education system to really grow the economy for the long term. So there's never a good time, but from a business perspective, you're investing in the future just like you would invest in anything else. And there are ways we can get our funding levels up without affecting our economy in the short term. Thanks.
I think there's a better way to do this than this coming back and forth. Again, we are learning. We did get a question from Michelle Rindels. If there's any specific commitments that we've heard from legislators, if they've told us of any plans for hearings or dates. Not necessarily, we don't know of anything specific, but we're looking forward to it. Hopefully they're watching, or they will be watching. Hopefully you all will be signing the pledge, and hopefully this is the impetus to really put the pressure on. To cut is not the solution. So far we don't know of anything specific, but we're hoping that in the future we do have some answers for that. And how might a potential infusion of federal COVID relief dollars affect the funding formula? Do you expect that will be available to fund waits? Has CARES Act's money to date helped with our educational funding problem, Amanda?
Yeah. So as folks understand it, COVID relief dollars are supposed to assist in helping us reopen schools safely. So we're hearing a lot about, well, local funds will be down, other state revenue will be down. It's okay, it'll fill in with federal dollars. To some extent that might be true, but at this point we don't actually know what the restrictions on those federal dollars would be. A lot of times those dollars come with strings attached. So they might not be able to be used for teacher salaries or something else. It might be a very specific use for those dollars. Even that said, those are supposed to assist with a lot of these issues we've seen over the past year, the COVID slide, the difficulty in achievement, getting back into the classroom. So if we're over-reliant on those funds just to fill budget holes, we're not going to be able to lift our students up the way that those dollars had really intended.
And another question that we got, this is from April Corbin, and this is a question for all panelists. What specific revenue proposals do you think Nevada should embrace in order to adequately fund K-12 education? Sales tax, gaming tax, mining tax, property, anything else? Mike's walking up, guys. But anybody that wants to chime in, please.
Well, reset upon sale for the property tax is probably the quickest proposal that could be addressed in the near term. It's not going to increase revenue dramatically in the short term, but in the long term, had we done this 10 years ago, we would have adequate revenue or close to adequate revenue now. And what it merely means is the property taxes on one house should be based on its market value, not on its age. And you can have two houses side by side, one 50 years old, one brand new, exactly the same market value. One pays a third of the tax as the other. So if this were addressed, we're the only, by the way, the only state in the nation to do this. If we were to charge property taxes and grandfather anyone in their house now, so nobody's taxes would go up, it would really be a tax on growth. As new people come into the market and they buy a house, whether it's old or new, they would pay the market value on the taxes. So that would be the easiest way to start the process, but there are many other potential solutions. And I think the broader the effect on it, because it affects everyone, education affects everyone, the better the initiative would be. And that's really what we hire our legislators to do, is to figure this one out. Thanks.
And just real quick to build off a little bit of what Amanda and Mike both said, when you think about using CARES money to fill budget holes. Now, yes, that might be a temporary solution depending on how that money can actually be allocated. But the issue is then we're just back in the same situation 2 years from now. And we also have to understand that in order to get ourselves to that national average, that revenue isn't going to be able to, even with new revenue proposed, to be created overnight. That it's something that we should have been working on, as Mike just alluded to, 10 years ago with some of these areas. And so if you're looking at the reset on property tax, us being the only state in the country that does not do that, and states did that because they understood that if property tax is a primary funding metric in your education system, by not doing that, you are drastically impacting the ability for schools to be adequately funded long term. And so having that piece done, grandfathered in, would not impact anybody immediately. Right now, it would only be towards growth. Looking at how we can start long-term, whether it's AJR1, which is addressing mining tax long-term. Again, that would have to go through another legislative session. So we need to start right now putting specific funding measures in place and making sure that not only are those measures there, but they're earmarked for education. And that's a big piece too, that as the slide that Amanda had alluded to, just because we create new taxes, if the state itself is not increasing base funding, our per pupil funding measures will never increase. They'll stay basically the same, because as we put more money into it, more money is being taken out by the state. And so the supplanting of educational funds is a huge issue, because not only does it impact, again, our funding, but it erodes trust in the community. So now we have community members who are saying, well, I don't want to vote for a new tax, even though I know that education is drastically underfunded, because I don't actually think that tax money is going to make it into the classrooms, to the students and to the educators where it belongs. I've had conversations with teachers who know firsthand how drastically underfunded education is, and they've said that same exact thing to me, that they won't vote for a tax right now because they don't actually think that lawmakers are going to take that money and increase per pupil funding. It's simply going to be supplanted. It's simply going to be taken out of the base funding. So those practices, not only do they cost education hundreds of millions of dollars every biennium by doing that, but again, it's also eroding the trust that the community has with elected officials. And then they blame schools or districts or the lack of use of funds at the site level, when really that anger and frustration about the way that money is being spent needs to be directed towards the state lawmakers who are taking that money out of education in the first place.
Thanks, Kaylin. I would just briefly add that in some of our discussions with legislators and business leaders, we've heard that although a sales tax is regressive and certainly would be hurtful to many people who are suffering right now in the economy, that perhaps a tax on services, which Nevada does not currently employ, would be a way to raise some funds as well. For example, you go to get a massage. most people who are really struggling in the economy are not, not going to be doing that. But some of us who are very well off perhaps are going to do that, choose to get a massage. And there are many other examples I could give. That could be taxed, and sizable revenue could be raised from tax on services.
Michelle, I would just add in the question that I'm seeing about what can be done now. You know, the Commission on Education Funding is looking at some of these specific issues currently. And that's one of the things that we are really focused on, is ensuring that the legislature is hearing from the Commission on Education Funding. We've gathered experts to discuss and analyze these issues, and it's important that we listen to what is being said. There's a focus on ensuring that we're not looking at things that are going to be as regressive and also stable. Some of the proposals on the table right now, we have to recognize, aren't necessarily stable revenue sources, and education is definitely an area where we need to make sure that that revenue base is stable and broad enough that it's going to support us over a long period of time. And so this is something that's not going to be just one thing, but rather we really need to look at what's a comprehensive plan that's going to meet the needs of Nevada students, not just right now, but 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And that's what states that have done this work well have done. They've looked at a holistic approach that recognizes stable sources that they can rely on long term.
Thank you, Rebecca. And yes, the commission is going to make recommendations on the best places, best routes for revenue, and they make that recommendation to the legislature, who has the ultimate decision and authority and responsibility to find the revenue. And, you know, we have a lot of different groups here. People maybe have different ideas about what the best is. It's not necessarily because one group wants something doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the other group is necessarily advocating for. We're all advocating that there just needs to be additional funding. How that's going to happen is really a recommendation from the commission, hopefully, and the legislators. It's really up to them to identify what the best thing is. We're here to support them in making sure that we do get increased revenue for our students. And then the next question, Amanda, if you can handle it, please. Are you concerned that many of the tax proposals on the table require constitutional changes? Rebecca answered that one. And somebody did ask, for those of us unfamiliar with revenue and tax jargon, can you please re-explain adequate weights? And Amanda's going to do that for us.
Yeah, so I'm glad Rebecca mentioned the Commission on School Funding. They've really been delving into, you know, what is the appropriate weights for students. And they just recently adopted the Augenblick Palatian Associates report recommendations for funding. This is a report, we call them APA. You might have heard of the APA report or APA study. They actually went around the state and interviewed educators, school officials, districts to find out, you know, what does it take to make sure that every student has the opportunity to meet state standards. So really you're kind of working backward. What is the goal that we want and how do we get there? So they did this work over the course of a year and came up with recommendations that have been presented to legislators. This was a state commission study, so this was actually funded by lawmakers. And the Commission on School Funding is kind of further refining that. What are the appropriate weights? What can we recommend to lawmakers? And they have recommended the APA weights because it makes sense, right? That's the whole goal of this, right? We want our students to be able to achieve at the very standards that we're requiring of them. So if you hear adequate, you hear APA, you're really talking about this, what's called a professional judgment study that happened in the state as recently as 2018. And we seem to have these studies every 10, 15 years. And sometimes we act on them a little bit, sometimes we don't. But this study, you know, is really kind of the impetus for the creation of the pupil-centered funding plan.
And we did get a question, how can we get legislators to stop supplanting?
Ooh, that's a great question. And I think really the main answer for that is diligence. Really kind of, you know, recognizing that when new funding does go into the education pot, you know, what is happening in the other parts of the budget? You know, are they decreasing the state general fund contribution to education in response to new revenue? So if you saw, for example, wholesale marijuana, about $30 million that first year came in, and the state general fund contribution reduced by about $30 million. So you can kind of see that. I think one of the great positives with the pupil-centered funding plan is all this is going to be a bit more transparent. There's a single account now called the State Education Fund, and there'll be these kind of these per pupil numbers that we can really point to and say, okay, this is where we are now. Where are we trying to get to? How far are we away from adequate? So I think, tracking those dollars just requires us all to pay attention. And I think that it'll be a little bit easier now to be able to kind of track where those dollars are coming from and where they're going.
And a follow-up question to that, Amanda, I'm just going to keep, if we raise revenue now, when would we actually see that money?
Oh, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question.
We'll send that question to a legislator on behalf of everybody who is elected.
I think, obviously tax proposals and bills have different effective dates, and, funding might be put in this year to be used next year. I'm not a tax policy expert, which is why, I even feel uncomfortable recommending specific taxes because, there's a lot of different, ins and outs of that. And as Rebecca had mentioned, the Commission on School Funding is going to be really critical in helping lay people like us kind of understand, when are these revenues going to be made available, what is stable, what's reliable, and how it's going to impact the community.
Another question that we have, and Amanda, just stay up here. The chart in the report indicates a steep drop in the amounts of money towards weights because of a transition to the new funding formula. Does this account for Governor Sisolak's plan to only partially implement the pupil-centered funding plan in the coming biennium? Are you advocating for any further changes in the implementation plan to avoid this cliff?
So, as a coalition or as a group, we're not advocating for specific changes to the pupil-centered funding plan. Those weights are what the Department of Ed has stated are the effective weights under the governor's proposed budget. So that's where those dollar figures came from. And then we worked on eligibility, pupils that are eligible at individual schools, and came up with those total dollar figures and how it would impact schools in the transition. I know there are a lot of people out there advocating for various ways to fix this issue. Yeah, there might be some technical changes to ease in the transition. I think ultimately what we're concerned about is we don't want just technical fixes. We want us to actually start moving towards adequate funding. We need to start moving towards, at least the national average in funding. We can't just, that's been the problem even with the categorical programs. It created winners and losers because, certain students were able to get those funds, certain students weren't. At that time, we had recognized there wasn't enough funding available to really impact the whole student population. Let's focus on these individual schools. Okay, now we're moving to, supporting all students. Well, we actually need to talk about revenue and talk about a way to fund it. We can't just kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best.
So in essence, without additional funding, we're taking revenue that supports 20% of these unique needs students and spreading it across 100% of all the unique needs students. And there's just simply not enough. It's kind of what we knew what was going to happen. We knew there was not enough revenue, but part of this bill said, hey, we're also going to raise the revenue to do this, right? It's not without growing pains, we know that. But we're not seeing, we're just seeing excuses, right? Right now is not the time, we're not going to do it. We don't have the revenue, and that's kind of the issue here. It's like, okay, we can commit to this. We can all be game and make sure that every student everywhere that needs these services gets them. But what is the plan to fund it appropriately? Why do we have to hurt people, other students? And if that's going to happen, what is the plan, like in the long term? And that's a little bit of the issue there. So I don't think we have any more questions. If you do have any questions, you go to empowernevadasfuture.com. There is an email there where you can submit something. We just want to thank everybody who tuned in today. We encourage everybody to go to the website, sign the pledge, share it with your folks, and be advocates. The theme is, are we going to thrive or are we simply going to survive? Cutting means we're going to survive, right? Just get through the budget. Thriving means that we're going to finally build a plan. We didn't do that last recession. We're in another recession. We've got nowhere left to cut because of our strategy last recession. So that's clearly not a good strategy. Let's plan. Let's do what we need to do for our students. again, thank you, everybody. Apologize for all the technical glitches as we're trying to figure out how to have a press conference in the age of Zoom. But thank you all for your patience. Bye.